Welcome back to the show. And joining us now, she is a former press secretary for Joe Biden from 2011 to 2015, has worked extensively with survivors in the high-profile cases involving Harvey Weinstein, Jeffrey Epstein, and Matt Lauer. She is now the managing director at SKDK, who are representing Janelle Grant, and a very interesting story coming down over the last 24 hours, but a pleasure to welcome Kendra Barkoff Lamy to the program. And Kendra, thank you so much for joining us here on Pollock and Thurston today.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, guys. I'm really excited to be here.
Can you just tell us a little bit about your background and how you were brought on by Janelle Grant's team, which was recently announced?
Sure, I'd love to. It is truly an honor to be working with Janelle and her team. She is someone who's experienced a deep trauma and is still working through it. But in terms of my background, as you mentioned, I have done a lot of work in the survivor area. I represented the Harvey Weinstein survivors, Epstein survivors, the brave and courageous woman who came out against Matt Lauer. I also worked with all the former employees of the Washington Commanders. I'm sure many of your listeners know who Dan Snyder is, and the former Washington Redskins that sort of slowly evolved into the Washington Commanders, and worked with those employees for probably almost 4 years to change the culture within that organization by eventually getting Dan Snyder to sell the team. And that took a long time, but I think what I have come to learn as working with all of these survivors in this space is, in order to change the culture within any of these organizations, it has to be sort of a holistic approach to going at it.
Just working in so many of these high-profile cases, I mean, do you see certain parallels between a lot of these figures and now somebody like a Vince McMahon as you're going through this case? Like, any, just from your experience that you draw from as you approach something just of this magnitude of what's alleged?
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. I appreciate you asking that. This is all about an abuse of power. Fundamentally, at the end of the day, this is about people who believe they are powerful and can do whatever they want. And most of the time it comes out on women. Sometimes it does affect men as well. And we saw that with the Washington Commanders specifically. There were former employees that were bullied. But this fundamentally comes down to this abuse of power and what they think that they can get away with. And until, again, sort of you go in and change and get them to sell a company or an organization or become more transparent. Sunlight, I think, is sort of the best way to do that. Ultimately, nothing will end up changing. And so that's my goal here.
And reading the letter from Ann Callis that was put out yesterday requesting that the parties who were involved in the civil lawsuit release anyone from NDAs who may have allegations of misconduct. Can you say, are you hearing from people specifically who have worked in WWE in the past who are bound to NDAs who do wish to speak out publicly about their experience?
Well, the Wall Street Journal, I'm sure you guys saw a piece earlier this year, reported that there were at least 4 settlements totaling $12 million to former employees over these same similar issues: sexual assault in the workplace, sexual harassment in the workplace. And so, there were at least those 4. We have heard sort of anecdotally from others that there are additional NDAs out there. But what happens a lot of time, and I will just clarify for the record, I am not a lawyer. I did not go to law school. So I'm speaking from sort of personal experience. And what I've seen is that a lot of times these women don't even, and men too, don't even feel like they can say, and part of what their NDAs do say is you can't even acknowledge that you have an NDA to begin with. I don't know what any of these other NDAs say, but a lot of times they'll say, if somebody picks up the phone and calls them to ask them about their experience working at the WWE, the person will say, I can't even talk, and sort of hang up the phone. So that happens a lot of times. I know that Janelle's legal team has heard from former employees about their experience within the WWE, and they themselves, even most recently, up until a couple of days ago, have heard from former employees just about this sort of toxic work environment that existed within the WWE and could potentially, we don't know what's going on now, which is part of the reason why we are asking for them to sort of open up their doors, allow these women and potentially men to speak freely, to waive these NDAs, if they have nothing to hide, if they claim that they've turned a page on this abuse, on this toxic workplace, then let these people speak about their experience so that they can sort of move on from there.
And beyond waiving the NDAs, are there any other specific reforms or changes that you think WWE should consider doing to improve their working environment?
I mean, I think that this is the first step in what they need to do. I mean, we all saw the documentary, the Vince McMahon documentary. I think he obviously was a big problem within the WWE, but a lot of the same people are still there. They are still working at that organization who are around when Miss Grant experienced what she experienced. And so, again, until we truly know sort of the breadth and the depth of the problem, we won't be able to understand how, as a culture, we can sort of move forward and fix it.
Now, to the best of your knowledge, these NDAs, to release these women from them, would that require any sign off from Vince McMahon for these NDAs to waive the enforceability of them?
I mean, that's what the letter exactly says that they want WWE and Vince McMahon. It is hard to know who signed what because, again, there's this little who actually signed what and when and all of those pieces. Again, we do know that folks have signed them and that there are out there, but without knowing what the NDAs say, it's a little speculative on who signed which individual NDA.
And thinking back to what's in the complaint that was filed by Janelle Grant in January, there are a number of corporate officers who were referred to. Several months ago, we reported that the four corporate officers are the WWE president, Nick Khan, and three executives who are no longer with the company, Brad Blum, Stephanie McMahon, and Brian Nurse. So Nick Khan is still the lead executive with WWE. And one question that gets raised to us often is, when it's Nick Khan, who was an executive when Janelle Grant was with the company, he was, though, below Vince on the org chart, although Nick was a member of the board of directors and still is what's your view about in the corporate environment? What does an executive in that sort of position, what responsibility does that person have to protect employees, and what can they do?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really great question. As outlined in her complaint, right, she is suing both Vince McMahon and WWE. As a company and as an organization, as a company, you have an obligation to protect your employees. And so if there were people that were there now or are still there now who knew about the abuse that was going on and did nothing about it, that's a problem. And you should and can be held responsible for that. So Nick obviously was still there at that time. Triple H was around at that time. And so there are still people that are within the organization now currently who were there at that time.
From the WWE's perspective, you're stating that this would be a good first step for them to show contrition, to show that this is a new culture that they are fostering. If they met a certain level, is Janelle Grant open to dropping WWE from this case? Like, where is, for WWE's perspective, like, they have done so much to distance themselves from Vince McMahon that waiving these NDAs, it will bring about all of this negative publicity for them as well. So just trying to get into their heads to incentivize this beyond just wanting to, clean up this very, very ugly mess that this company's history has on its resume.
Yeah, and if they want to clean up this mess, then they should allow these women to speak freely and these former employees to speak freely at the end of the day. I mean, everybody has read the lawsuit, the complaint. It is very detailed in her allegations. And there's a reason why she's going after the organization as a whole. It is because, again, as an organization, as a company, you are responsible for protecting your employees. And so, at the current time, her lawsuit is in a stay. The federal government asked her to just sort of hang tight as they do their investigation into Vince McMahon. So that's sort of where she's at. There's nothing that's happening on her current lawsuit. And so she's in a little bit of this kind of holding pattern, sort of waiting. But in the meantime, I think that's part of the reason why even now it's more important and why she, wanted to send this letter to sort of show that this sunlight is the best sort of disinfectant. And let's get in there. If you guys say that this was all Mr. McMahon's doing, that there was, no one else within the organization participated in any of these activities, then great. Then put it back on him and show that was him and that there's no other issues. But we can't know that until they themselves become transparent and allow these people to speak.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that this letter, a copy of it, was sent to not only WWE executives, but to Ari Emanuel as well, who is the CEO of Endeavor and TKO, which is for people who might not know, that is the parent company of WWE now. They merged in 2023. One comment from Ari Emanuel that I think is meaningful to this conversation is he was criticizing his rival talent agency CAA at a conference in October. Saying that the lead executives at CAA had been supportive of Harvey Weinstein and things like that. He said, quote, they should take a leave of absence. An investigator should come in and they should look at what they did. They didn't apologize. They didn't deny it. So from my perspective, it's horrific, end quote. So he's taking issue with a rival talent organization. It seems to speak to his objection to sexual misconduct in the workplace, for one thing. And how do you see, that sort of ethical standard being applied here?
It's really interesting. It's a great question. In California, they have in the federal government, there's a law called the Speak Out Act, and it has to do with passed by Congress, signed into law a few years ago, and it basically allows for, if you have an NDA dealing with these issues, sort of post the law being signed into law, you can speak freely about your experiences. And so in California specifically, they have an even stronger and more stringent law, which says if you have been sexually assaulted or sexually harassed in the workplace, you can go to your HR department, you can go to sort of the leadership and say, I want to speak freely about my experiences. That law is not passed everywhere. So only California has it. I think New York has something kind of similar to it. So stronger, maybe New Jersey, stronger laws that are in place to protect the employee should something happen to them while in the workplace. And so, one thing that Ari Emanuel and Endeavor could do is to say, we believe, because we own WWE and we believe so strongly that employees should have the ability to speak up about their experiences in the workplace, that whatever law applies in California should apply in Connecticut as well. And these employees that have experienced things or have NDAs in Connecticut, we're going to take whatever law sort of applies here and say, even though it's not the law in Connecticut, they can speak freely. So, he can put his money where his mouth is, so to speak, a little bit too, because as you mentioned, Endeavor does inevitably own the WWE.
Yeah. And we did reach out yesterday evening to two spokespeople for WWE and Endeavor. We haven't heard anything, which is their normal non-response to this. They usually do not comment on this. I think they've only given at least one comment on a written article, and that was for when we were reporting on who the anonymized officers were. Is your response to their effort to try to ignore this, basically? And what I think fans have seen a lot of is, especially at WrestleMania this year, sort of a bringing forward of who the new leaders are. Nick Khan making a small appearance on screen and Paul Levesque being heavily featured. It's sort of we've moved on from Vince McMahon kind of message, and we're trying to avoid any direct addressing of the issue.
Yeah, and I'm sure they are, right? I'm sure they're not probably thrilled that they got this letter yesterday and they got a lot of calls from reporters. But not responding is actually the worst way to deal with it, right? There's a way that you can say, okay, we're going to either open our doors or we're going to review the letter, we're going to do something. And my general sense is you're right. They don't tend to respond to, these kinds of things, but that doesn't mean we're not going to continue to try to push for what is right. I mean, that is the whole reason why Ms. Grant came forward to begin with, to sort of tell her story and tell what happened, because she believes that there are others that also deserve to be able to speak about their experience.
I just wanted to go quickly back to you. You do mention the Netflix series that recently came out on Vince McMahon, and it is like not an insignificant subject that we have seen sometimes these mass-produced documentaries, whether the recent ones on the Menendez brothers, you go back to the Jinx on HBO, that these series have sometimes led to real actions being taking place. Do you feel that the Netflix series is an overall positive just to awareness of this story? And how did you feel that the aspects of this case were represented in the series?
We're obviously glad that they included Miss Grant's case in the first and the last episode. It's really important, I think, because it does frame and it does show even more so who Vince McMahon was and is as a person. It is a good thing. I think it has brought a lot more interest. Obviously, there's a lot of people who love WWE and follow it very closely. There's a lot of people who, have followed Mr. McMahon's career and what he has done. But those kinds of documentaries, especially, it reaches sort of a mass audience that frankly may not have known about Miss Grant's case, what she experienced. And so it does reach a new and different audience that I think is really, really important. And the more people that know about what has happened to her and what has happened, what happened while at the WWE, the better off it is.
Yeah, and at the media call that was held by yourself and Ann Callis a few weeks ago, I know there was a lot of mentioning of Janelle she'll have her opportunities sometime to tell her story. Is there anything you could share at this time about how or when that might happen?
No, we're still trying to figure that out. I think there will be a time and there will be a place for her to tell it in her own words in a way that she is, feels really good about. But I don't have any announcements at this point in time.
And I just wanted to end things off speaking about Janelle, because I feel so much that we get away from the fact that this is a human being involved in a lot of this. And I'm curious as well, just the amount of work you're doing directly with Janelle and how she is doing over these past months where this has become such a major story. And inevitably, it's got to be one that she's carrying a lot of weight and stress from.
Yeah, I mean, it is not easy. I think on the call, her lawyer, Ann Callis, talked about how she still is very much in a sort of feeling the post-trauma of what she experienced. There's a lot of issues that she's still working through. But let me tell you, she is a strong, courageous woman. She is here for the fight. She is here to sort of take this and make sure that the proceedings go the way that they need to go in order for, Mr. McMahon and WWE to be held accountable. I mean, a lot of people wouldn't be doing what she is doing. And I give her so much respect. I have so much admiration for her because it's got to be hard getting up each and every day, knowing that sort of what you experience. And if your viewers read the complaint, I mean, it is the stuff that she did experience as a person is just horrific. I mean, you could never imagine the stuff that she experienced on your worst enemy. And so, the fact that she does get up each and every day is just a tribute to who she is and what a wonderful person she is.
And I'd just add, given that this is like a wrestling centric show, if there are females that might be watching this that have experience in the WWE and maybe they do want to speak up, is there anywhere you could direct them toward if there are people out there that maybe like they have had their own experience that they've kept to themselves? Yeah,
we would obviously love to hear from you in whatever way you feel comfortable doing so. We have an entire legal team we're working with. Holland Trial Lawyers is sort of the legal entity. I'm at SKDK. We're a DC-based public relations firm. Happy to talk to any survivors who feel like they want to tell their story in some way, shape, or form. Happy to connect them with attorneys. I still hear from survivors on a regular basis, sort of across the board in various industries and walks of life, and sort of happy to have that preliminary conversation and no pressure. Obviously, if you feel like the time is right and you want to have that conversation, great. If you're not ready to, that's okay as well.
Well, Kendra, thank you so much for coming on, keeping us updated on the case, and we wish you all the best moving forward.
Thank you guys for covering it. It's really important and appreciate it.